Okay, drummer tracks and the drum kit designer instrument, part 2. In part 1 we looked at everything to do with the theory of these drummer tracks, how they generate their patterns and everything like that. And in that part 1 we saw that actually these drummer tracks can trigger any software instrument you like. But the default instrument is this drum kit designer, so we'll look at this in some detail now. And the drum kit designer instrument, there it is in the library drum kit, right? It comes in 2 different flavours. You've got your stereo kits that the drummers load by default, and then you've got these advanced multiple output producer kits. Okay, now you have to download all the content to get all this stuff, right? And you manage all that download content here, look. Okay, now at the beginning of chapter 3 I'll show you quickly how to get this extra content downloaded, but you can see it says installed all down this status column here. I've already downloaded and installed all the stereo kits, which includes the drummers themselves and all the multi-out kits and the producer patches, so I've got all the content. Okay, so in part 3 of this tutorial we're going to look at the advanced multi-out producer kits, and trust me, they've got some pretty complicated mixes going on for beginners to understand. I'll give you an example of just one. Look, I'll load up this one, Vintage Breaks. Okay, this is its mix, ready, with all the multi-outs and everything. Boom. Yeah, there's a lot going on, right? Not only have you got all the multiple outputs plus the extras, there's other things going on in this mix. You've got drum subgroups being created to do different things. You've got parallel compression. You've got shared auxiliaries going on. There's a whole bunch of things going on in this mix to get the overall sound of the kit. I don't want to be explaining those basic things in the middle of showing what's going on here. Okay, let me just undo. Go back to the stereo kit. So the way it's going to work is this. In part 3, coming next, we're going to look at these advanced output producer kits, multi-out producer kits, but this is part 2, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at the basic stereo kits that the drummers load by default, but you can switch these basic stereo kits into a basic type of multiple output mode, but it's enough for us to learn what we need to learn about multiple output drum mixing. Okay, so this is part 2, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to look at the basic stereo kit switched into multiple output configuration, and we'll look at basic techniques to do with drum mixing, different ways to populate your drum channel strips for the different output drums. We'll look at stuff like how to do parallel compression, how to do shared auxiliaries, all that stuff, the basic stuff. Once we got that under our belt, then when we look in part 3 at the advanced producer kits, hopefully beginners, you'll be able to understand what the hell is going on as I explain it in the mixer. Okay? Okay, so part 2, let's crack on. Okay, here we go. Let's start from scratch. I'll delete the track. Okay, we've got all the extra content downloaded, but when you create a drummer track, you're not given any option like, do you want to set up a stereo or a multiple output drummer track? You just create a drummer track. Okay, and it loads up the last drummer you were using or the default drummer. Let's look in the mixer. Okay, here we are. We just have a stereo channel because it's just a stereo kit. We can lower or raise the whole kit in stereo, that's all we can do. Okay, and there's an EQ and a compressor on the channel ready to go, and there's also an auxiliary send going out to this small half-second reverb. So the more we turn up the send, the more of the kit goes into this little reverb, so the more we turn it up, the more it sounds like the whole kit is being put into a small little half-second decay time room. And that's your lot. Okay, here's the instrument slot. If we drop the pair of arrows down, we can change the instrument here. Now that won't change this from being a drummer track, but it'll simply change the instrument that's being triggered. So here, for example, I would put the ultra beat on this track if I wanted the drummer patterns to trigger the ultra beat. And at the top is the current instrument, drum kit designer. There we are, look, it's stereo, but we can switch it to this basic multi-out mode. But remember, this is not the same as the full-on producer patch multiple output kit. We're just switching the basic stereo kit into a multi-out mode. Okay, so we do that, boom. And at the bottom, down here above the solo button, a little pair of buttons has appeared, a plus and a minus. Close, this opens but we close it, right? Okay, this plus and minus button allows you to add extra outs or take away extra outs. So we click the plus 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's it. That's all the outs you would get. We get one for the kick, the snare, the toms and the hats. If we keep on adding extra outs, we get these auxiliaries, but we can't route drums to them when we're in this stereo mode, you know, where we switch to multiple outs. So they're useless. So if you create too many, just take them away with the minus button. Boom, 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 like that. Okay, so that's what we get. Separate outs for the kick, snare, hats and percussion and toms. And the main output here, this becomes like our stereo overhead mics on the kit. This is all our cymbals, our crashes and our ride cymbals. So we can mix. Kit, kick drum, snare, hi-hats. Let's switch to a tom pad. Toms, toms. And as I said, the main output, let's switch to a cymbal pan. The main output is handling all the cymbals, the crashes and the rides. Here we go. Okay, that's it, and now we can begin to mix. And all the separate outs here, they're currently unpopulated. There's nothing on them. There's no EQ, no effects or processors. Every channel has this effects rack here and this EQ thumbnail here at the top, right? So we'll begin with the kick. We double click in the EQ thumbnail box and it will put an EQ into the rack here below and open it. Boom. Now we can add some EQ. We can choose a preset. Now, just to say for beginners here, there's nothing wrong with using a vocal or a brass or a guitar EQ preset on a drum. You should always load up the wrong, in inverted commas, type of presets for these effects processors just to see what happens. That's how you learn, okay? But for the sake of this tutorial, I'll just load up this EQ preset called Standard Kick EQ. There it is, and it puts this EQ curve on the kick. Okay, now let's just quickly, for beginners, look at what's going on here. This peak here, this 1, 2, 3, the fourth peak EQ band, it's got this peak, it's got this boost on it. That's the click of the kick drum. And if I boost it right up, you can hear it exaggerated. Okay, this area around here, 3 to 6K around here, this is where all the sharp attack is of instruments and vocals and things, right? So, you know, you boost it up, tune into the frequency you want, drop it down a bit, etc. Okay, so that's boosting the click of my kick drum. I can tweak that to taste. And then this here, this first second peak EQ is scooping out the mids. It's taking away all the mids by cutting the mid range around 500 Hertz. Put it back in, you can hear the mid again, take it away. And then this first peak band here, if I wanted to, I could drop this down to about 100 Hertz, boost it up a bit, and we can start adding bass to the kick drum. Tune into the bass frequency you want with the frequency here, how much you want it boosted, etc. Yeah, so, you know, there's some basics. Maybe I won't scoop out the mids that much. I don't want that much click. So, you know, there's a basic standard kick EQ. Okay, now underneath the EQ in the effects rack we can now put another processor, and here again for beginners I'll say that when you're mixing drums, to be honest, all you need on each drum output is an EQ and a compressor. You know, that's pretty much it. You occasionally will use another type of processor if you're doing a particular effect. If you're mixing live drums that were recorded on mics, you might use noise gates as well. But to be honest, EQ and compression, they're your go-to tools for mixing drum outputs. So I'll put a compressor on here. And the compressor just, you know, gives the drum more punch, and stops it being too loud and overloading things. So again, I'll load up a preset for this compressor for the kick, and again I'll say beginners, don't be afraid to experiment. There's nothing wrong with putting, I don't know, platinum picking guitar, yeehaw, or octovocal or FET keyboards. There's nothing wrong with putting any of these presets onto a drum. Always experiment, right? Okay, when I say learn things, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'll put on this Type R kick drum preset for the compressor, which is going to just make my kick drum more punchy and keep it under control from being too loud, etc. Okay, like that. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm populating this channel strip. I'm adding processing effects in manually, bit by bit, tweaking them and building a sound for my kick. I'm populating this channel strip. These ones are not currently populated. Now, I could keep on manually populating each channel strip like that, but the other thing we can do is we can load up a channel strip preset, which will load a bunch of stuff onto the channel, ready to go, which will shape any audio passing through that channel. And if we load a preset that's for snare, it'll shape the snare, channel, for example, to make the snare sound better. That's the idea. Okay, so we can load up a channel strip preset on any of the separate outs, the kick, snare, toms, or the hats, percussion, but because each of them has this setting slot at the top. Look, setting. So we can load a channel strip preset onto any of these separate outs, but we just can't do it for the main out because it's got the instrument on, so its setting slot at the top loads up a different instrument. Okay, let's load up a channel strip preset for the snare output channel. Go to the setting slot at the top, and we've got, first of all, these channel strip presets here. Now, these are really not much use. These are effects-based channel strip presets that will add effects, delay, reverb, or time spatial stuff to the output, and really these are for synths, to add effect stuff to synthesizer outputs. Yeah, by all means you can experiment with these, because these will, if you put one of these on, it would put wacky delay effects on your drum output and stuff. By all means experiment, but you'd really only use these if you're doing some sort of special wacky effect. Okay, but all we have available to us are these legacy channel strip presets, which means they're the old ones that are brought over from previous versions of Logic. Okay, so we go at the top of the channel, setting, legacy, Logic, drums and percussion, acoustic drums, and there's a little category for each type of drum. There's some for the whole kit, there's some for the kick, the snare, the hats, the toms, and these warped ones are effects. And there's a tiny selection of presets for studio percussion. Okay, this is a snare channel, so I'll go acoustic drums, acoustic snare. There are 5 to choose from. I'll choose acoustic snare 3. And it loads a bunch of things onto the channel, which will shape the sound to make my snare sound like this. Okay, let's put on a compressor, an EQ, and this Space Designer reverb. I can adjust the amount of reverb with this reverb amount here, look. Okay, or I can turn off the inserted reverb altogether. Okay, so that's how you populate a channel strip in one go. You just load up a channel strip preset from the setting slot at the top. Okay, now by loading that channel strip preset called Acoustic Snare 3, I've renamed the channel Acoustic Snare 3, so I'll just quickly rename it Snare. Okay, and you just continue like that. Like, I could load one for the toms, legacy, Logic. Drums, percussion, toms, and there are 5 to choose from. Acoustic toms 1, which makes, switch to a tom pattern. Come on. Oh god, it's going to crash on me now, isn't it? Yeah, which makes my toms, let's load a tom pattern up, which makes me toms sound like this. Let's put a compressor, an EQ, and a Space Designer reverb on, and you can adjust the amount of reverb here. Or turn it off completely. Okay, so we can continue like that. And again, of course, I've loaded up Acoustic Toms 1, and it's renamed the channel Acoustic Toms 1, so I'll just quickly rename it Toms. Okay, so we can do that. And we can do it to all the outputs, but not this main output, which is now handling the cymbals. But what we can do is we can load up a channel strip preset onto any of these outs and then copy and paste it onto this original output which is handling the cymbals. So let's do that. I'll go to the hats percussion channel here, setting slot, legacy, Logic, acoustic drums, acoustic kit for the whole kit. I'll choose Bright Kit. Load it up onto this hi-hat channel. Go to the settings slot at the top. Copy everything, which I'm copying the entire channel strip I just loaded. Go to here, paste it in, and that will paste in everything but leave the instrument alone. Boom, there we are. And it's replaced everything on the channel but kept the instrument itself. So the auxiliary send that was on here, which was sending out to this small reverb originally when it was just a stereo channel, that auxiliary send's been removed. So this auxiliary is not being used anymore, so we can delete it. You should always delete any unused auxiliary returns because they just cause visual confusion on your mixer and they use up buses that could be used elsewhere. Okay, so we've done that now. We've got this channel strip preset called Bright Kit loaded up here and then copied and pasted across to here, and it's got an exciter as part of its preset. So if I just switch to a symbol pattern, I can bring in that exciter to give my cymbals more brightness and fizz. Yeah, and I could shelve off the bottom EQ so that my cymbals get thinner. Whatever I like. Okay. Of course, I've pasted that channel strip preset called Bright Kit across to it. It's renamed the channel Bright Kit, and as this is the main channel with the instrument on it, it's renamed the track Bright Kit. So I'll just quickly rename it something like Kit, something simple. Okay. You just do that. You can do it like you can either manually create your channel strips by adding things bit by bit, or load them up from the settings slot at the top. I'll just finally load one for the hi-hat here. Look, legacy. Come on. Hats, trashy hi-hats. Let's switch back to a hat pattern. Yeah, trashy hi-hats, which makes me hi-hats sound like this. Yeah, and it's renamed the channel Trashy Hi-Hat, so I'll just rename it back to what it was before. Hi-hat /percussion. Yeah, so that's all the different ways you can populate your channel strips when you're doing these multiple out drum mixes, yeah. And it's the same for any channel on the mixer, but we're just doing drums, so. Okay. And then to do your mix, you just tweak your compressors, tweak your EQs, and adjust your levels and whatever. Alright. There's your basics about populating the channels, getting your separate outs on a stereo kit. I want to show you one other thing now. Okay, let's look at something else now. We loaded up these channel strip presets from the settings slot at the top of every channel, right? But we only had access to the old legacy stuff. Right, check this out. I'll create an audio track. Audio. Here's its channel strip in the mixer. Before you do anything, make sure this is a stereo audio channel, right? Up here, switch this. You click on this circle, make it a pair of circles, and the LED ladder here for the level gets wider, right? Okay, it's a stereo channel now. Okay, we create this audio track, and if we open with the audio track selected, which also selects its channel in the mixer, if we open the library, look, we've got access to the latest audio channel strip presets. Now we can't access these when we choose one of our separate outs here. Okay, these are only available to audio tracks and their channel strips, and these are the latest version audio channel strips, and there are some for voice, there are some for acoustic guitar, some for other instruments, and importantly there's a whole load for drum and percussion. Okay, now I haven't got all the content downloaded, but there's a selection for the hi-hats, the kicks, the overhead, snare, toms, percussion, and the whole kit. Okay, now the legacy stuff is still here. Look, here's the legacy stuff. You can get access to that here for the audio tracks as well. This is the same stuff, right? Legacy, Logic, drums and percussion, acoustic drums. There's the same categories. Yeah, it's the same stuff as on our separate outs, right? But audio tracks and their channel strips have access to this the latest version audio channel strip presets, and we can load them up onto an audio track channel strip and then copy and paste them onto our separate outs. That way we can get the latest version audio channel strips for drums and percussion onto our drum outputs. And normally these drum and percussion audio channel strip presets, you'd use them on audio tracks when you're recording real drums with microphones, right? Okay, so we highlight the track, make sure it's highlighted, its channel strip is highlighted. We go to drums and percussion, kick, and I'll choose natural kick. Ready? Boom. And we've loaded the channel strip preset called natural kick onto this audio track channel strip. It's put an EQ, a compressor and a noise gate on there, and it's created two reverbs on two auxiliaries. Here, look, an ambient and a small plate on the first two available buses, bus 1 and bus 2, and then it's put two auxiliary sends on the channel sending out on bus 1 and bus 2. Okay, so now we just go to the settings slot at the top, we copy that channel strip setting, go to our kick output, paste it in, paste, and we've got one of the latest audio channel strip presets on our separate drum output for our kick. Okay, now we can repeat the same thing. Let's do it again and load one for the snare. But there's a bug. Yeah, there would be, wouldn't there? It's logic. This bug, I don't know why it does it, but the bug is this. When you go to load the second audio channel strip preset for the drums, it will switch the two auxiliaries to the next two buses. So we're on bus 1 and 2 at the moment. It'll switch them to bus 3 and 4. Now, pretty much all these drum channel strip presets load up the same small ambient and small plate reverb. But for some reason, when you go to load your second one, it will keep the ambient and the small plate, but it will just switch them to the next two buses. I don't know why, but it's a bug. Here we go. Snare. Clean snare. Ready? Boom. You see what I mean? It's kept the two reverbs, it's just switched them round left to right. But it's still the ambient and the small plate. And it's put them on, look, bus 3 and bus 4 now. And it's put the sends on bus... Oh, anyway. Not a problem, we can fix that. Now we've loaded this snare channel strip preset. We copy it. Go to our snare output, paste it in. Boom, done. And now the last thing to do is fix that, because the auxiliary sending to the reverbs has been switched now to bus 3 and 4. We've got to change them here, look. So we switch these to bus 3 and bus 4. And that's it. And you just carry on like that, load another one, copy and paste it onto whatever output you want. Okay, and when you finish, just delete the audio track. But don't delete the channel in the mixer, because sometimes that deletes one of the reverb returns, right? Click on the track itself, so this becomes the active editor surrounded in blue. Click on the track and delete the actual track, which deletes the channel strip from the mixer, but usually it leaves the reverbs behind. Although there is a bug where sometimes when you delete that audio track and its channel strip, no matter what you do, it will delete one of the reverbs, in which case you just have to leave the extra audio track there, even if it's not being used, you know. Okay, so there's another technique to get the latest audio channel strip presets onto your drum separate outs, and it's just changed the sound now. Here we go. It's made the snare much deeper now and fuller, and of course it's got a little bit of each reverb on it. Okay, so there's another thing you can do. So let's move on now and look at some fundamental sort of drum mixing techniques, which is useful for beginners in its own right, but also we need to learn these kind of techniques, the basics, so that we can understand what the hell's going on when we look at these way more advanced producer kits in the next part 3. Okay, right, let me get rid of these two auxiliaries here and the sends. So I highlight the two channels here that have got the sends on. I do that by using command and left clicking, which brings them into the selection. Now when you have more than one channel selected like this, if you do something to one of them, it does it to all of them. So if I remove the send from one, it'll remove it from both. No send. Okay, no more sends, so we can get rid of these two auxiliary returns now. Starting from scratch, just so beginners don't get confused. And I'm actually just going to rename this as just kick. Okay. let's look at some of these drum mixing techniques. Using command, we left click and bring in all of our drum output channels into the selection. They're all highlighted now, which means if I do something to one of them, it'll change whatever I'm changing on all of them. So on any of them, on the first available send slot that's free on every channel, I'll insert a send. On the first available bus 1, boom, there it is. So every drum channel now has got an auxiliary sending out on bus 1, and it's created this auxiliary receiving on bus 1. Okay, let's solo this. This is a stereo channel. Now, I can send a little bit of each drum from the output channels here into this stereo bus. A little bit of kick. The more I turn up this send on the kick channel, the more of the kick arrives in this stereo bus here. So I can have a lot of kick or not too much, whatever I want. Okay, snare, toms, hats, etc., cymbals. So you see what I mean? Do you see what's happening here? I'm building a completely separate mix of the drums on this stereo bus, and the mix, the amount of each drum in that mix, is determined by how much the send is turned up on its channel. If I want more snare, I turn it right up. If I want less snare, I turn it down. See? So I've got this separate stereo mix on this bus now. Okay, now let's put a compressor on it. And we're going to choose a preset, something that says aggressive, pumping, whatever. I'm going to go with this VCA smashed. Let's try that. Okay, now my submix of the drums here is going through this smashed compressor. Let's hear it. Okay, that's making a really aggressive, pumping, smashed, compressed mix of the drums. It's very, very powerful, but it's way too dirty to just be our drum mix. Okay, unsolo it, turn it down. I'll turn my cymbals down just a little bit in that mix as well, actually. Okay, now we've got the clean mix here on the separate outs here. Okay, nice and clean. Okay, and then what we do is we fade up the grungy mix in parallel alongside the clean mix. Yeah, what a difference it makes, huh? And of course, once you've got your compressed mix going, you can further tweak how much of each drum is in that compressed mix by further tweaking your auxiliary sends going into this stereo compressed mix. Okay, so this is like your power and your glory, and the individual outs are the clean mix of the drums. And so we have the clean mix, which gives us all the definition, then we fade up the power and glory alongside. Yeah, that's called parallel compression. And that's a technique that goes back decades, and that's how engineers get a nice, powerful drum sound. Okay, it's one of the techniques they use. You can use it on the whole kit or individual drums, pair or groups of drums within the mix. Okay, if you want to, you can go a further step and add a distortion. Add this distortion here, for example. Or actually, I'll go with another one. I'll go with the this plain old distortion here. Yeah. Now we've got the combination of the compress and the distortion on this submix. Yeah. Which we can fade in alongside the clean mix. Yeah, that's another thing you can do like that. Or you can just have distortion. Let's change it for a different type of distortion. Let's change it for this clip distortion now, yeah. Yeah? So we just got a distortion of mix now. We've got tone, how much it's distorting, how much clean or distorted mix. We've got a low pass filter, make it, you know, let more and more and more of the top end through. And again, we can fade that up alongside our original. You see, you can use distortion or compression or a bit of both, you know. I'll switch this back to the plain old distortion again now. Yeah, or both. But what a hell of a difference, yeah? Okay, that's a technique that you're going to see when we look at the producer kits next. Well, let's do another one. Highlight all my outputs, get rid of this auxiliary, no send, it's gone, get rid of that, delete. Because I just want to start from scratch each time so beginners don't get confused. Okay, now another thing that happens is we have shared reverbs. When we load up some of these channel strip presets, for example the tom one here, it loaded a reverb onto the channel. Now this reverb is on this tom channel as an insert. Right? Now it is a legitimate way to do things in a mix. You can put reverbs inserted onto individual drum channels in a mix, but the general rule of thumb is that you only do that when you're putting a sort of a reverb on a particular drum as a special effect. Maybe it's a very small, tiny little ambient space that you're using to brighten up the drum and give it more power, or it's a gated reverb or something. But what you don't do is you don't have an individual reverb on every single drum, and then each drum is going through its own reverb, and then if all those reverbs are different, there's no glue holding the kit together. Every drum sounds like it's in a completely different space, right? You don't do that. What you do is you use shared reverbs. Right, so we'll turn this off and we'll just do a shared reverb. We just bring everything, all our outputs for the kit into the selection with command left click. Again, if I do something on one, it does it on all of them, so I'll create a send on one, first available bus 1, and it puts one on every channel. Okay, there, here's the bus, return, and on it we put a reverb. It's pretty straightforward this. It's a similar technique to when we did the compressor, but we're just using a reverb this time. Okay, and then on here we'll put a small, this little drum plate, and I'll call this small reverb. So now we can, just like with the compressor, we can send out a little bit of each drum to the reverb. Kick, snare, toms. See what I mean? And you can send a little bit of each drum, as much as you like, into that space, but all the drums sound like they're in the same space. Okay, now we can repeat the process. This is what you do in a hardware studio in the old days. You'd have your best two reverbs on two auxiliary sends. One would be typically a small reverb and one a large one, and you do it like that. And then your lesser reverbs, which would, you know, once cheaper digital reverbs came in, your lesser reverbs would be things like your SPX 90s or Rolands or whatever, and your main reverbs would be your Lexicon, your AMS or whatever like that. Yeah? Okay, so we'll put another auxiliary on the next bus 2, and this will be our large reverb. So we've got two shared reverbs now. Just put a reverb on here. Bish bash bosh. Load up a large big plate, but it's 4.5 seconds. I'll just drop it down to about, what is that, 3.5 seconds. So now we've got a large reverb we can send any drum to. Okay, that's another concept, another thing that we do in mixing. These shared auxiliaries sharing, allowing all the instruments, the outputs to share different reverbs. These don't have to be reverbs; they can be all sorts of things, delays, whatever you like. Okay, that's another kind of technique we'll see. And then let's remove all these sends. I'll show you one last one. No send. No send. Okay, get rid of these like that. Okay, one last one. You're going to encounter, when we look at these producer patches, you're going to see submixes going on within the kit. Okay, now if we look at all the outputs, look at their output. They're all going to the stereo out, stereo out, stereo out, stereo out. So every drum output is being fed to this final stereo out, which goes off to your speakers, right? What we're going to do now is we're going to take the snare and we're going to send its output to a different destination, to a bus, the first available bus, bus 1, and also the tom. So the cymbals, the main output, and the kick and the hats are all going to the main output here. Right? But the toms and the snare are going through this bus. So the snare and the toms, their signal is leaving their channel, going down the bus, arriving at this channel here, and then going out of here off to the final stereo output. But the other drums are all going direct to the stereo output. So now the drums are passing, the toms and the snare are passing through this fader on the way to the output. But it's not like before where we sent a little bit of each of those drums out into an auxiliary. Now the whole drum is passing through here. Goes through here and then on to the output. Right? And again, we've created a submix here of the snare and tom, which I'll call snare. No! Come back, which I'll call. What the hell did I do? Sorry about that. Which I'll call snare tom. This is a submix that's going on now. And then across this we can put a distortion or something, right? So here we're adding distortion to the snare and the tom, but they're passing through the distortion and then out onto the final mix. You know, onto the final output. We're not adding a little bit of distortion into the snare and toms, we're passing the snare and toms directly through the distortion on their way to the final out. That's a little submix going on there, and you'll see that technique being used as well in these multiple out producer patch mixes. Okay, right. Now obviously these submixes where you're sending a few, 2 or 3 or whatever drum channels to a submix within the main mix, this is something you do more when you've got more outputs going on. Yeah, we've only got 5 outs here in total, so it's, you know, something you perhaps wouldn't do with less outputs, but and you can mix and match on this. We've got this sub output here, you know, like a sub mix of the snare and the tom. I could add on to this a send and then have a reverb, and that reverb could have like a small plate or something. And then I could send some of the, this is the mix of the snare and tom, and they're passing through this bus. So the snare and tom, their signal leaves their channel, goes into this channel, through the distortion, and then out of the fader and onto the final mix. But now we can send a little bit of that out. We can send a little bit of that out to the reverb. Yeah, so we're mixing and matching techniques now. And I can add more and more distortion to the tom and the snare. And more or less reverb. Okay, so there we are combining a submix and a send. Yeah. Okay, so you know, these are all things that we're going to see that you can use when you're mixing your drums to get different mixes, different sounds, and we're going to see these techniques being used when we look at the producer kits in the next bit. Okay, so have a cup of tea and I'll see you for part 3.